Hey guys, Rev here, and this is Mondays in Matthew, where we talk about the Gospel of Matthew. And this week, we're going to cover chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. Now, we're also going to talk a little bit more about the dream, which we talked about the last time we were together, the dream that Joseph had. So if you stick around till the end, we'll cover all those verses and then get ready for the next message, which is probably one of the more disturbing passages in the New Testament. So thanks for being here. And my name is John. They call me the Rev, and I have been teaching the Bible and particularly the Gospel of Matthew for about 36, 37 years. And so this is the stuff that I've learned and the stuff I've experienced, and I'm just happy to share it with you about this particular gospel, which has an emphasis on the marginalized. That's who it was written for, and it's also who comes out in the gospel. These are the people that Jesus seems to have a preferential treatment of, those that are on the margins. So anyways, here we go. Last time that I talked to you, I talked a little bit about Joseph's dream, how that was so important. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that because I think when it comes to our practical reality, I think sometimes we discount things without really internalizing them. In this particular case, there was a huge decision to make, and Joseph had already decided that he wasn't going to marry Mary because she was pregnant with someone else's child. But he, being a good man, he didn't want to do that publicly. He didn't want to disgrace her. So he was going to do it privately. And that he'd made up his mind that that's what he was going to do. And then he has a dream. And in this dream, an angel comes to him and tells him, hey, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. In fact, you need to do that. This decision was a huge decision. A lot of us don't understand it in our culture, the shame that he was going to bear for raising a child that was not his own. He was doing exactly the opposite of what his culture told him to do. This is a major cross-cultural thing that's going on, and Joseph is right in the middle of it. I think that maybe sometimes we hear things that are either our subconscious talking to us or the universe, or in my case, I believe that God's speaking to me when my guard's down, right? When I want to let everything go and allow my brain to just process information. It's at that moment that God can often talk to us. And I'm guessing that you've had dreams. Usually it's the ones that you remember that were powerful dreams. And you knew there was something about that dream, but too often we just ignore those. So I just wanted to share with you a dream that I had. Now, I don't totally trust dreams. I always have a discernment process where I take the dream and I share it with the people in my church. I share it with people I respect, and I try to get a well-rounded view of what's going on. And if they say, you know what, John, that was just your brain being weird, then I'll accept. But sometimes it's not just my brain being weird. Sometimes it's a deeply influential, even transformative thing that is going on in my head. And so I just want us to be on the lookout for that. In my case, there's been a number of those occasions where a dream that I had really affected my life. And the one I'm thinking of is we were in Australia. We were having problems getting our visa renewed. I tend to think that it had to do with me being a part of the Christian anarchist movement in Australia and having some friends that were pretty big celebrity activists that had been arrested and thrown in prison for years. That's what I thought. My friend says that the government's not that sophisticated, and the better thought was that they just lost my paperwork. But either way, we're having trouble with our visa. We're having trouble with this reality that if our kids were going to go to college in Australia, they would have to pay international student fees, which there's no way we could afford. I mean, there was no way we could afford that. And so we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And I had this dream. I had woke up and I was crying because I knew that we were moving home and I was going to miss all my friends in Australia. The ministry that I had there, I was really going to miss it. And I woke up crying. The crazy thing is, I shared that with my church that exact day. We were meeting the next morning, and so I shared it with my house church. One of my dear friends, who actually lived right next door to us, he started crying. He said, "John, last night I had a dream. And in that dream, we were in this house and everything was in boxes. You were moving back home." Sometimes things happen. Maybe it's just following all the signs. In this case, it was pretty apparent that something was going on, and the answer was not to fight the government, not to try to figure out a way to make it all work out, but it was time for us to go home. Don't sleep on your dreams. Uh, yeah, that was a horrible pun. But I mean, don't sleep on your dreams. Your dreams can be telling you something that's really important. And in this case, it was. And in Joseph's case, it really was something that was setting him up for a lifetime of ridicule and disrespect, just being an outcast, being marginalized. That's what happened with Joseph when he obeyed what he was told in this dream. What happens from your dreams is not always a good thing. I didn't want to go home, but it was what had to happen. And in this case, Joseph listened to what the message in his dream was, and he lived it out, even at a great cost to himself and his reputation and his family and everything else. This was a big decision, but he was faithful to what was going on inside of him. In my opinion, it was the Spirit of God talking to him. But it doesn't matter really. The message is stay in tune with what's going on because it can really affect your life. And in this case, it did. The angel said, when you get married, you're going to have a son, and name your son Joshua because he's going to save his people from his sin. And then a little further on, it says that Jesus will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that's one of the first things that people that believe Jesus was divine in a different way, a special way. That's one of the first things they key in on is this description that Jesus is going to be called God with us, God present with us. And then we see through this whole bit that the patriarchal culture gets turned upside down because Joseph actually is in a shameful position of having another person's baby. He wasn't the father. In fact, in this case, there wasn't an earthly father. She was impregnated while still a virgin, and it completely turns the whole thing upside down. And that's important that we realize these situations because God is actually turning everything upside down in this narrative. So anyways, Joseph does what he's told, and he names the baby Joshua. In naming him Joshua, he was adopting him. Okay, they didn't have formal adoption papers that cost thousands of dollars and all that kind of stuff. By him saying that Jesus's name is Joshua, it was him saying This is my child. So he does what he was instructed to do. He names his son Joshua. What happens in the midst of all this is that because of Joseph's obedience, remember, according to the narrative, by taking Jesus as his son, his adopted son, but not his real son, his adopted son, but by him taking Jesus under his lineage, it fulfilled all of the genealogy from David to Jesus is completed because Joseph took Jesus as his son. This dream had cosmic proportions, proportions that echo all the way through till our now, and will continue to do so. For good or for bad, that's up to you to decide. But for me, it's like this story changed my life. It made me experience the world in different ways. And that's because that Joseph made a decision of obedience. And we get into those places. We find those places that we're into where we have to make a decision. Maybe we understand the decision we're supposed to make in ways that don't seem logical, that don't seem natural, that seem crazy to all of our friends. But Joseph did what he was supposed to do, and it changed the course of history. I think that's a powerful thing that we should take a look at. So in addition, we bump into this kind of weird situation. My Jewish friend, Guy, if you listen to this, Guy, you've been a really important friend to me. Guy, as a devout Jewish person, asked me, well, why do you Christians reverse scripture? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, you backwards read. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean by backwards reading? And he says, you take passages of the scripture that had already happened, that were already fulfilled, and you pull them forward and you apply them to Jesus. I don't understand why you do that. And this happens over and over and over in Matthew. And I was able to explain to him, hey man, the reason why we do that is because the actual story that was told to a Jewish community does that. The passage of scripture that says a virgin shall bear a child, and that child will become the Messiah, that scripture goes back to Isaiah. That scripture's from Isaiah. And he was actually talking about the king, and the king was going to have a child, and it wasn't going to be from a virgin. The king was going to have a child, and that child was going to save Israel from their enemies. So when it gets reinterpreted, this happened to fulfill the scripture that said, a woman shall bear a child, and that child will become the Messiah and save the people. That's what the scripture said. A young woman would have a baby. There was no idea of virgin. But when the New Testament, when Matthew goes back and looks at that scripture, it says that this scripture was talking about more than just what it was talking about. This scripture was a picture of what was to come. And in that, they take the scripture and they actually do use a different word. And that word is the virgin, which also ties into this anti-imperial message. Romulus, the founder of Rome, was said to be born of a virgin. So in this case, you see this pitting against that this is Rome, and this is Rome's mythology, and this is the truth of our mythology that's coming against what Rome is doing. I think that's very important to realize and to remember. The other thing is he was asked to do something that I think is a bit crazy, being a man who's married. Joseph didn't have marital relations with Mary until after the baby was born. Because if he would have done what was legally right for him to do as a married man, if he would have done that, then Mary would not have been a virgin when she had her baby. So he not only sacrificed his future, but he actually gave up something that, as a man, I can tell you, it's kind of hard to imagine giving that up. Um, anyways, this was an intense situation, and Joseph stepped into it with honor. This was a situation that took Joseph off of his position of the pater familias. It took him off of that position, and it put him in a position of actually social shame and being subservient to his own son. I think that's a pretty amazing story, and that's what we're talking about. So if I can leave you with something, I would say that don't neglect these thoughts, these dreams, these resurrections of hope. Whatever it is, don't neglect those. Take them seriously. Don't completely change your life because of a dream, just because you had a dream. Talk to the people that know you. Talk to the people you trust. Try to make sense. And remember, God doesn't steer parked cars. If you want God to steer your life, you have to try to make a good decision and go, trusting that God will steer you in a different way if you're not supposed to be on the path that you choose. But listen to these things, listen to these inner voices, and respond to them. Because if you do, it may not change history like the birth of Jesus did, but it can change your history. It can change the history of your neighborhood, of your town, of your city. You can change a lot of people's lives just by being attentive to whatever it is that God, the Spirit, the universe, your subconscious is telling you. Because there's something in that that says, this is who you actually were meant to be. This is you. This is why you were put on this earth. So I hope that you found the story a little bit enlightening. And if you did, please hit the like button. Share this with other people that you think might benefit from it. And talk to me in the comments. Argue with me in the comments. Interact. I don't want this to be the John show, but it kind of is until you guys get involved. So please get involved. Tell me you think I'm a heretic. I don't care. Let's talk. So please do those things. Also, please remember that I'm the Rev, and I love you.